Da 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 da, ba ba da ba da da, ba da do, oi oi oi, da 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 da, da 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 da, ba ba da ba ba da. Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Monday, Yom Sheni. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Monday? Yehud in South Carolina, Michael in Culver City, Melissa in Great Neck, Lucy in Minnesota, Shandor in the Bronx, Joe in the Inland Empire, Guy in Ohio, Bell in Texas, Paul in the Great Northwest, Roger in North Carolina, Joseph Sierra Nevada, Lorraine in Texas, Gail in Kansas City, Elle in Southern California, Alan in New York City, Frank in San Pedro, Chaim in Florida. Welcome, everybody. Short daf today. Page 56 here in, actually page 57. We're starting on 56b. Our daf is page 57 here in Tractate Avoda Zara, continuing our discussion of Mishna number 8 here in chapter 4. And the Mishnah 8, right, is about if you purchase a wine press from a Gentile. So the overarching theme here is that since wine is one of the most typically used substances in worship, right? Still to this day. So in the ancient world, it was very, very commonly used by idolaters as part of their idol worship. They would pour wine libations on or in front or near, however they did it, their idols. And so therefore, the wine of idolaters absolutely prohibited for Jews because unlike other substances, there's just such a high possibility that it was used in idolatrous rituals that the sages simply decreed that the wine of idolaters, and in that time that just meant Gentiles, right? So the wine of Gentiles is prohibited to the Jews. And so still today, where there's really very little concern that people are bowing to idols, nevertheless, one of the things that makes kosher wine kosher is that it has been supervised throughout the process. All these steps that we're talking about here, in the wine press, into the vat, into the barrel, all the steps of the process for kosher wine are supervised, by some kind of a rabbi, some kind of mashkiach, somebody who supervises the kosher process. And that's required so that we are heeding the law. Right? There are many times when a decree was passed at a time when it was necessary. Later, those conditions have changed, but the law remains on the books. It's just a feature of being Jewish. There are some laws that are still on the books, even though the original cause for them no longer exists in the world. But because they're still on the books, it's part of our tradition. It's part of what we have to invest in, so to speak, as Jews. And I mean, it accomplishes one of the, it's clearly one of the purposes, or at least features, of so much of halacha, of Torah law, that it keeps the Jews apart, right? It keeps the Jews a distinct people, and that's part of our survival. Such a tiny nation, still distinct, still maintaining its relationship with God through Torah, through learning, through the mitzvahs, through the commandments, 3,000 years later, right? And part of that is that we honor these laws, and sometimes the laws don't really make rational sense, but the effect of following that law is it separates us from other peoples and keeps us distinct. We can interact with other peoples, we can have wonderful relationships and friendships with other peoples, but in keeping our laws, we keep ourselves a distinct people. Okay. We're picking this up about, 56b is a very short daf, so even though we're near the end of it, we're basically like halfway down it. Okay, the Gemara relates, there was a certain outstanding child who learned the tractate of Avoda Zara when he was 6 years old, right? So the same tractate we're studying, at least the Mishna of it, he learned it when he was 6 years old. This is a real prodigy. And people raised a dilemma to him. What is the law? Is it permitted to tread grapes in the winepress together with the Gentile? What's the issue here? When the grapes are being trod in the winepress, we can say that they have not become wine yet, right? Wine, which is in the possession or is touched by a Gentile, becomes prohibited for Jews. And you can't benefit from the wine of Gentiles because it could be used for libations. But as we were talking about yesterday, when the grapes are simply being pressed in the wine press, that's part of the process, but you wouldn't say that, what's in there in the wine press is wine. Basically, it seemed yesterday that it's when the wine leaves the wine press and enters the vat that it starts to be called wine. So the Gentile who is, and a Jew who are, with their bare feet crushing the grapes in the wine press, they're not really dealing with wine yet. So one point of view is that this is permitted. The other point of view is, but it's a Gentile getting involved in your wine. And if some of the grapes or the juice that come out of the wine press go back into the wine press, it's like it has been touched by wine and the whole thing could be prohibited. So let's see what happens here. This child who learned Avoda Zara when he was 6. They raised a dilemma to him. What is the law? Is it permitted to tread on grapes in the winepress together with the Gentile? And the child said to them, one may tread on grapes in the winepress together with the Gentile in accordance with the ruling of the Mishna. So they asked the child, but doesn't the Gentile render the wine a libation, which is to say, therefore prohibited for Jews, by touching it with his hands, rendering it forbidden? If so, how may a Jew derive benefit from the wine by receiving payment for his work? It's not even asking whether we could drink such wine. It's that if the Jew is getting paid to tread on the grapes alongside the Gentile, he's essentially benefiting from that wine because he's getting paid to be involved in it. And if that is actually wine already, we're going to consider that wine even before it emerges from the wine press. And how could a Jew take that benefit from the wine of Gentiles, which is to say, potentially the libation of idolaters? How is this possible? So the child replied, it is permitted in a case where we tie his hands so that he cannot pour the wine as a libation. So the child was then asked, but doesn't the Gentile render the wine a libation by touching it with his foot? Okay, you tied his hands so he can't be pouring libations, but his body is still touching the grapes, right? His bare feet are treading on the grapes. And the child replied, no, rendering wine a libation by touching it with one's foot is not considered rendering it a libation. That's just not the normal course of things, since we're already quite attenuated and removed from, actually a Gentile taking finished wine and pouring it as a libation in front of his idol. Here, the wine hasn't even been turned into wine yet. We're still in the wine press. The guy has his hands tied behind his back. Okay, his feet are on the grapes. That's just too far away from what we would call a libation to deem it a libation that would render the wine prohibited, so that the Jew could not, earn a few shekels just being a guy who steps on grapes in the Gentiles' wine press. Now, the Gemara relates there was a certain incident in Nehardea in which a Jew and a Gentile trod on grapes and produced a certain wine together. So it seems like, okay, they trod on the grapes and then they produced wine after that. So it sounds like, okay, well, they can tread together and then there's wine that comes out of this. Whose wine is it? Is the Gentile working for the Jew, just stepping on grapes, or is the Jew working for the Gentile? Unclear. Let's keep reading. There was a certain incident in our day in which a Jew and a Gentile trod grapes and produced a certain wine together. And Shmuel delayed ruling on the matter for 3 festivals, as the sages gathered during the festivals and presented Shmuel with the opportunity to clarify the matter with them. And so the Gemara asks, well, what is the reason that Shmuel delayed his ruling? Right? If they're not sure what the answer is and they need the next gathering of sages to discuss it, why would you wait 3 festivals before you have this discussion? If Shmuel knows what the answer is, what is he afraid of by bringing it up together with the other sages? What's the reason that he delayed his ruling? So, if we say that Shmuel delayed ruling on the matter because he thought to himself, and now we're on 57a, I should delay my ruling. Why? As if I find a Tana, right? So a Tana is a sage of the Mishnah. These would be sort of the elders, the seniors, compared to the sages of the Gemara during a transitional time when we have both of them together. I should delay my ruling, as if I find a Tana who prohibits the wine in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Nassan, I will prohibit even deriving benefit from it. Well, this is difficult. Rabbi Nassan prohibits one from deriving benefit from wine that was touched by a Gentile, as it is taught in a Baraisa. If a Gentile measured a Jew's wine, whether he measured it with his hand or with his foot, it may be sold. That's the majority opinion. But Rabbi Nassan says if he measured it with his hand, it is prohibited. But if he measured it with his foot, it is permitted. Right? So what are they saying? Measuring, not even drinking, not otherwise touching. But somehow the Gentile got involved, touched the wine. If it was done with a shinui, right? In other words, if he did it with his foot, then it would be clear that they were being very careful to make sure that even though he was measuring, he didn't come into contact with the wine, and so we would leave the wine permitted. But if he did it with his hand, it means that they weren't so careful. It's possible that the Gentile touched the wine, and against that doubt, we have to render all that wine prohibited. Now, the Gemara explains why the suggestion that Shmuel delayed his ruling because of the opinion of Rabbi Nassan, like if that was his reason, then this doesn't make sense. It's difficult. Say that Rabbi Nassan said that the wine is forbidden when the Gentile measured it with his hand. But did he say that the wine is forbidden if he measured it with his foot? Rather, Shmuel delayed ruling on the matter because he thought to himself, if I find another Tana who permits the wine in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who holds that if a Gentile touches wine without intending to render it a libation, it is permitted, I will permit the wine even for drinking. Right? So here we're making that distinction that we've talked about before, that when it comes to something like, in this case, let's talk about wine, a wine which is a beverage that can be consumed. If we say that it's going to be prohibited, there's 2 stages, really 3 that we've talked about, of prohibition, right? The most lenient would be like no prohibition at all. We deem that the Gentile didn't have any contact with it. Maybe he came near it, but he didn't touch it. And so this wine, which belongs to Jews, remains permitted for Jews to drink it, right? Then there's an intermediate stage where the Gentile came into some kind of contact with it. We're concerned that he could have rendered it, he could have used it as a libation, or we just have a stringent ruling overall anyway. And so we would say that not only is it prohibited? Well, we would say it's prohibited for drinking. He can't drink it, but because it's only a possibility that he came into contact with it, we're not sure. We might say that the Jew is still permitted to benefit from the wine. He could buy and sell it, even though he can't drink it. And then the most stringent view, or the most stringent stage of this, would be like if we knew that there was wine that idolaters actually used as a libation, then not only would we be prohibited to drink it, we would not be permitted to even benefit from it. We couldn't even touch it. We couldn't have anything to do with it whatsoever. Okay. So let's see what's going on here. What he's saying is, like, I guess the status of the law at that time had enough ambiguity in it that now it sort of needed, the law needed to be set. They realized that this ambiguity, they weren't sure what the ruling was. They would need to set it. But I guess Shmuel didn't want to cause a loss, to this merchant who maybe was going to lose a lot of wine. So he's allowing the wine to be used up before they make the definitive ruling, which is maybe going to render it prohibited. On the other hand, he's also concerned that if he gets the wrong sages here who come and make a ruling that he disagrees with, where he wants to be more stringent and that Tana permits it, that might be a ruling that's too permissible in the eyes of is it Rabbi Nassan? No, it's Shmuel. In the eyes of Shmuel, who's really one of the Gedolim, like really the big authority in Bava. So let's see what happened. There was a certain incident in Biram that occurred as follows. There was a certain Gentile who was climbing a palm tree, and he brought down with him a palm branch. So while he was descending from the tree, he unintentionally touched some wine with the tip of the palm branch. Right? So the Gentile did not touch the wine with his hand, but he touched something that he was holding, touched the wine. Okay? So in that situation, Rav permitted the owners to sell the wine to Gentiles, which would indicate that they could benefit from it but not drink it. Rav Kahana and Rav Asi said to Rav, "But wasn't it you, Master, who said that if a Gentile baby who is 1 day old touches wine, he renders it wine used for libation, even though he lacks any intent, which would indicate that we can't even buy and sell it?" So Rav said to them, "Say that I said that the baby renders the wine prohibited for drinking. Did I say that it is prohibited to derive benefit from it? It is therefore permitted to sell the wine, even though it came into some kind of incidental contact with the Gentile. In this case, if he had touched it with his hand, it would have become prohibited. But the fact that a branch that he was holding had a little tiny incidental contact was enough to render prohibited for Jews to drink it, but they could still buy and sell." Now the Gemara cites Rav's statement in order to discuss the matter itself. Rav says, if a Gentile baby who is 1 day old touches wine, he renders it wine used for libation, even though he lacks any intent. So you can see that this is a kind of strict liability prohibition. Obviously, the baby, which is being used as an example of a human that has no capacity for action, right? A 1 day old baby doesn't do anything, except coo and drink, right? But the point is that if a Gentile baby, even 1 day old, touches wine, even though it's obvious that this is a Gentile who cannot use that wine as a libation, it's to show you that the decree was an overarching decree. They said, they stated very simply that if a Gentile touches the wine of a Jew, he's going to render that wine prohibited. Right, and so what Rav is saying is it doesn't matter what we don't go in and examine the situation and investigate and say, well, did the Gentile actually pour that wine out as a libation before his idol? It doesn't matter. The sages wanted us to distance our wine from Gentiles altogether, and so he said, if a Gentile touches your wine, that's it. That wine is now prohibited. It's a loss to the Jews. They can't, it's no good to them anymore. They might as well give it away because they can't buy and sell it. They certainly can't drink it. Right? If a Gentile baby who's 1 day old touches wine, he renders it wine used for libation, even though he lacks any intent. Rav Shimi Bar Chia raised an objection to the statement of Rav from a Baraisa. with regard to one who purchases from the Gentiles slaves who have been circumcised but have not immersed in a mikveh, and also with regard to the sons of the Gentile maidservants, right, female slaves, who grew up in a Jew's home and were circumcised but did not yet immerse in the mikveh. What are we talking about? If we're talking about somebody who's circumcised but not yet immersed in the mikveh, what they're saying is, and the reason they're talking about slaves in the ancient world is because slaves often, when they were freed, converted to Judaism because they were almost there already. And having lived in a Jew's home, they realized that it was going to be better for them. Even now, when they are free of obligation, they're no longer slaves. They'd rather be a Jew because there's holiness. They're not in the realm of idolatry, etc. So whether one was a slave or not, what's good about being a slave is that they already learned how to be a Jew because they lived among Jews. Somebody who's hasn't lived among Jews but desires to become a Jew, it's going to take a much bigger, steeper learning curve before they can sort of live as a Jew. But what we're talking about here is conversion, right? So when we're talking about a male who's going to become a Jew, he needs to be circumcised. If he's actually already medically circumcised, he'll just have a small ritual circumcision, which is just like a tiny little incision that draws a drop of blood. And he has to immerse in the mikveh. So if they're saying somebody is circumcised but has not yet immersed in the mikveh, they're saying somebody who's at the end of the process of converting but hasn't finished it yet. That's what we're talking about here. Right. So the point is about this. What's the point here? We're going to raise an objection to when Rav says that a baby that's a Gentile, even though it obviously has no intent to pour wine out as a libation, the fact that it comes into contact with the wine renders it prohibited. This is going to contradict something about this, pseudo-Gentile, because he's been involved in the conversion process but isn't there yet. So how does the contradiction work? Let's read. Right, so start again. Rav Shimi Bar Chia raised an objection to the statement of Rav from a Baraisa with regard to one who purchases from the Gentiles slaves who have been circumcised but have not immersed in the ritual bath, in the mikveh. And also with regard to the sons of the Gentile maidservants who grew up in a Jew's home and were circumcised but did not immerse in a ritual bath. Their conversion is not yet valid. They have the legal status of Gentiles who transmit tumah like a zav, which is a man who experiences a gonorrhea-like discharge. Right? We talked about that by decree, Gentiles transmit tumah, even though by Torah law they don't. Again, this is just to create that distance, right? To keep our food and our beverages away from the hands of Gentiles, so that we don't come to, mix with them and get involved in their forms of idolatry, etc. This is all protection against Avoda Zara. That's why we're studying it in Tractate Avoda Zara. Okay. So with regard to these Gentiles, their spittle and objects upon which they tread, even if they are found in the marketplace, are tamei. But some say that they are ritually pure, tahor. Right? So this test of whether they're tamei or tahor is really related to, are they a Jew yet or not? Right? Because, and it's interesting because non-Jews do not become tamei or tahor. But idolaters can transmit tumah because of this rabbinic decree to keep us at a distance. Now, the Baraisa continues, with regard to their wine, these adult, right, near converts but not yet, the adults render the wine that they touch wine used for libation. After they immerse in that mikveh, they're going to be Jews. And then they can touch the wine and drink the wine, and we can sit together and drink together all we want, because then they're Jews. But until then, until they complete that process, they're not Jews, and therefore if they touch the wine, they render it a libation, and therefore the wine becomes prohibited to other Jews. But the minors, right, these minors who are, the sons of slaves, they do not render the wine that they touch wine used for a libation. And which slaves are considered adults and which slaves are considered minors? The adults are those who know the nature of idol worship and its accessories, and the minors are those who do not know the nature of idol worship and its accessories. This would indicate that a baby that's 1 day old, that obviously doesn't know anything about idolatry, if it touched the wine, it should not render it prohibited as a libation. So that's the contradiction. So in any event, the Baraisa teaches that with regard to adults, yes, the wine they touched is rendered prohibited, but with regard to minors, no, the wine they touched is not rendered prohibited. And this contradicts the statement of Rav. So the Gemara replies, interpret the distinction between adults and minors as referring to the sons of the maidservants. Since they were raised in a Jewish home, there is less reason for concern lest they render the wine an idolatrous libation. And therefore the sages did not prohibit wine touched by minors in this situation. This distinction does not apply in the case of slaves that were purchased from Gentiles because they didn't grow up in a Jewish home and know what Jewish law is. The Gemara asks, doesn't the Baraisa say that the halacha applies to slaves purchased from Gentiles and also to the sons of Gentile maidservants, indicating that there is no differentiation between them? And the Gemara replies that the Baraisa equates the two cases only with regard to the impurity of their spittle and of the objects upon which they tread, but not with regard to whether they render wine prohibited as a libation. The Gemara asks, this works out well according to the one who says that their spittle and the objects upon which they tread are impure. But according to the one who says that they are pure, what can be said? If the spittle of the slaves and the objects upon which they tread are pure, clearly the law is the same in the case of the sons of maidservants, and it is unnecessary to state this. One may therefore conclude that the Baraisa equated the two cases with regard to the status of the wine they touch. So it sounds like we have reinstated the contradiction vis-a-vis Rav. So the Gemara replies, even if the Baraisa is equating the two cases with regard to the status of the wine that they touch, it is not equating them with regard to the distinction between adults and minors. Rather, this teaches us that the law with regard to slaves is similar to the law with regard to the sons of maidservants, and just as in the case of the sons of maidservants, it is only those who were circumcised but did not yet immerse who render the wine that they touch wine used for libation. But those who are circumcised and immersed do not. So too, in the case of slaves, once they have immersed in a ritual bath, they do not render the wine prohibited. So this law is to the exclusion of that which Rav Nachman says that Shmuel says. As Rav Nachman says that Shmuel says, in the case of one who purchases slaves from the Gentiles, even though the slaves were circumcised and immersed in a ritual bath, they still render the wine that they touch wine used for a libation, as they are accustomed to idolatrous practices, until reference to idol worship disappears from their mouths. And the Baraisa teaches us that their wine is not prohibited. Again, because in the ancient world where slavery was such a common practice, you had to have laws that address it, and take into account the fact that you had, non-Jews serving as slaves in Jewish homes who were well-versed in Jewish law and would know better than to, use the wine in any kind of a way that would render it prohibited through being used as a libation for idolatry. New subject. The Gemara cites the aforementioned statement in order to discuss the matter itself. Rav Nachman says that Shmuel says, in the case of one who purchases slaves from the Gentiles, even though the slaves were circumcised and immersed in a ritual bath, they still render the wine that they touch wine used for libation, as they are accustomed to idolatrous practices, until the reference to idol worship disappears from their mouths. And how much time does that take? Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says one does not assume that the slave has forgotten his idolatrous worship until 12 months have passed. Rabbah raised an objection to Rav Nachman from the aforementioned Baraisa with regard to one who purchases from the Gentiles slaves that have been circumcised but have not immersed in the ritual bath, and also with regard to the sons of the Gentile maidservants who grew up in a Jew's home and were circumcised but did not yet immerse in a ritual bath. Their conversion is not valid and they have the legal status of Gentiles, so they would render wine prohibited if they touched it. And with regard to whether they impart tumah, their spittle and objects upon which they tread, even if they are found in the marketplace, are ritually impure, tamei. But some say they are ritually pure. So with regard to their wine, the adults render the wine that they touch wine used for libation, but the minors do not render the wine that they touch into wine used for libation. So which slaves are considered adults and which are considered minors? The adults were those who know the nature of idol worship and its accessories. The minors are those who do not know the nature of idol worship and its accessories, as we read just a few minutes ago. Now we're on page 57b. So in any event, The Baraisa teaches that with regard to those slaves who were circumcised but did not yet immerse in the mikveh, yes, the wine they touch is prohibited. But with regard to those who were circumcised and immersed in the mikveh, no, the wine they touch is not prohibited because they've been brought into the realm of the Jews, into the realm of Judaism. Even if they're still Canaanite slaves, they do get circumcised and immersed in the mikveh. And in fact, if they're the slave of a Cohen, they can eat teruma, even though a Jew who's not a Cohen but is free and a full-fledged Jew cannot eat that teruma because these Canaanite slaves who are circumcised and have immersed in the mikveh are now part of the household of the Cohen if they are in a Cohen's household. Now the Gemara replies, interpret this law as referring only to the sons of maidservants who were raised in a Jewish home and never engaged in idolatrous worship, but not to slaves who were acquired from the Gentiles where they did practice idolatry. The Gemara asks, doesn't the Baraisa teach that the law applies to slaves purchased from Gentiles and also to the sons of Gentile maidservants, indicating that there is no differentiation between them? And the Gemara replies, the Baraisa equates the two cases only with regard to the impurity of their spittle and the objects upon which they tread, meaning do they impart tumah? That is a separate question from whether they render wine prohibited as a libation. Now the Gemara asks, this works out well according to the one who says that their spittle and the objects upon which they tread are impure, but according to the one who says that they are pure, meaning they don't impart tumah, then what can be said? If the spittle of the slaves and the objects upon which they tread are pure, clearly the same law applies in the case of the sons of maidservants, and it is unnecessary to state this. One may therefore conclude that the Baraisa equated the two cases with regard to the status of the wine they touch, not whether they impart tumah. And the Gemara answers, even if the Baraisa equates the slaves and the sons of maidservants with regard to the status of their wine, it does not intend to compare their status once they have immersed in the mikveh. Rather, this teaches us the law with regard to slaves is similar to the law with regard to the sons of maidservants. Just as in the case of the sons of maidservants, it is only the adults who render the wine that they touch wine used for libation, but the minors do not render the wine they touch wine used for libation. So too in the case of slaves, the adults render the wine that they touch wine used for libation, but minors do not render that wine a libation. The law is, and this law is to the exclusion of that which Rav says. As Rav says, if a Gentile baby who's 1 day old touches wine, he renders it wine used for libation. And the Baraisa teaches us that this is not the case. New subject. The Gemara relates, there was a certain incident in Mechoza in which a Gentile came and he entered the store of a Jew. And the Gentile said to the owners, do you have any wine to sell? And they said to him, no. They're only selling wine to other Jews. They're not selling wine to Gentiles because they could have an accident like what's about to happen. They said no. But there was wine sitting in a bucket. The Gentile put his hand in it and stirred the wine around. Now he rendered all the wine that was in that bucket prohibited. Not only could Jews not drink it, they can't even buy and sell it. The Gentile said to them, well, is it not wine? And the other person, the store owner, took the bucket and in his anger threw its contents into a barrel of wine. Talk about, he was angry that he lost the value of the bucket. Now, in his hissy fit, he mixed that wine, by mistake, obviously, with a whole barrel of wine. So now that wine that was rendered into a libation and therefore prohibited for benefit for Jews that was in the bucket, some of that mixed into the barrel, and that means that now the whole barrel becomes a libation of a Gentile and therefore prohibited. He just lost something that, could have been worth like a serious amount of money for him. He threw, and in his anger, he threw its contents into a barrel of wine. Another reason you got to learn to control your emotions and not give in to anger, something we pray for every day. This incident raised a dilemma with regard to the status of the wine in the barrel. Rava permitted the owner to sell the wine to Gentiles, right? He could benefit from it even if he can't drink it. As Rava held that it is permitted to derive benefit from this wine. So wine that a Gentile touched, but we know he didn't use it for a libation. It was sitting in the Jew's store. Okay, but he touched it. And then some of that wine then got mixed with other wine, right? So it said like we're getting further and further away from the actual prohibition of the wine of Gentiles because they might use it for a libation. And therefore, Rava was lenient and said that the wine in the barrel, even though Jews can no longer drink it, at least the owner could sell it to Gentiles. He could get that benefit from it. But Rav Huna bar Chanana and Rav Huna, the son of Rav Nachman, disagreed with Rava. Blasts of shofarot went out from the court of Rava, promulgating his ruling. Right? It's like now you have a disagreement among the sages, and the question is, well, it's not like they haven't established there's a Supreme Court, and whatever there's a ruling of the Supreme Court, that's what everyone in the Jewish world is going to do. Wasn't that cut and dry? So Rava is disagreeing with somebody's fellow sages kind of at his level, and there's two of them. Now, maybe Rav is more prominent than they are, especially in the area where his authority extends. So he thought that people should be following his ruling. So he promulgated his ruling. Rava says that in that situation, the wine is permitted. And blasts of shofarot went out from the court of Rav Huna bar Chanana and Rav Huna, the son of Rav Nachman, promulgating their ruling. And they prohibited the sale. Now, this is a terrible situation for the Jewish people. You've got two major poskening, rabbis, sages in that period, who are disagreeing about a ruling, and both of them are sending out their rulings into the community. At that point, people are going to have to decide, do I follow Rava? And maybe they have followed him all their lives, so they're going to keep doing that. Or do I follow Rav Huna bar Chanana? Maybe there's people in his community, but right? People who are not necessarily attached to one or the other, they're going to have to make a decision. Probably going to ask their local rabbi who they should follow, and that's whoever their local rabbi follows. That's the kind of thing that happens. So we have this dispute, right? Rava permits, and Rav Huna bar Chanana and Rav Huna, the son of Rav Nachman, prohibit. Now we're at the top of 58a. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Nachman, happened to come to Mechoza. Rava said to his attendant, Rav Eliakim, close the gates so that people who might disturb us should not come, and we may focus on clarifying the matter. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Nachman, entered into Rava's presence, right? This is a good opportunity. Rava is saying, okay, shut down the school, all, pressing business. This is an opportunity for us to have one consistent ruling for everybody. So he's going to now engage directly with Rav Huna, the son of Rav Nachman. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Okay, so Rav Huna, the son of Rav Nachman, entered into Rava's presence. And Rav Huna, the son of Rav Nachman, said to Rava, what is the law in a case like this, where a Gentile stirred the wine without intending to offer it as an idolatrous libation? Right, so here we have, we know that the idolater did not use it as a libation. This could be distinguished from a case where the idolater touched it, and we don't know what his intent was. Here we know. He had nothing to do with idolatry and libations. He was just in the store, and he stirred it around because he wanted to buy some wine. What do you want to buy it for? We don't know. Maybe he wanted to buy it for libation. Maybe he just want to have some wine for his dinner with his wife that night. We don't know. But he didn't do anything that clearly showed that he intended to use it for a libation. All he did is he stirred the wine around in the bucket while he was in the store. Now, what we've said earlier is even a baby that's 1 day old, that's a Gentile, if it touches the wine, boom, it's prohibited. So that would seem like, well, we know what the law is, and what this guy did renders it prohibited. Are we saying we need a clarification? Apparently. So let's see what happens. Right? What is the law in a case like this, where the Gentile stirred the wine without intending to offer it as an idolatrous libation? So Rava said to Rav Huna, the son of Rav Nachman, it is prohibited even to derive benefit from it. Now, didn't Rava say the opposite when he sent out his shofarot rulings? Rava permitted it. Now Rava is saying it's prohibited. What's going on? Rava said to Rav Huna, the son of Rav Nachman, it is prohibited even to derive benefit. Right? Not only prohibited for drinking, but even to derive benefit. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Nachman, asked him, but wasn't it you, master, who said, if a Gentile stirs the wine, he does not render it wine for a libation? And it was you who permitted the sale of the wine in the barrel to Gentiles, right? We can't drink it, but the owner could still benefit from it. You're the one who permitted it. We prohibited it. Why are you saying now it's prohibited? Rava answered, say that I said that it is permitted to sell the wine that was in the barrel and benefit from all the proceeds, except for the monetary value of that prohibited wine that was poured into the barrel of wine. Did I say that it is permitted to derive benefit from the monetary value of that prohibited wine? Right? Even Rava was saying that the actual wine that he touched is prohibited. The fact that it went into the barrel, they're going to have to make a calculation and say, okay, we can't benefit from the amount of wine that was added to the barrel. So if this guy in his anger just poured a whole bucket in, well, maybe that's a significant amount. If it was just a few drops, okay, it was just a few drops. But we're going to have to make a deduction. When he sells the barrel, we have to deduct the value of the wine that was actually touched by the Gentile from that sale. So to that extent, Rava agrees that wine touched by a Gentile, even without idolatrous intent, does render that wine prohibited. What he's permitting is wine that then comes into contact with that wine. Rava said, when I arrived at Pumbedisa, Nachmani, which is a nickname for Abaye, surrounded us with Amoraic traditions and Tanaitic sources cited in a Baraisa that indicate that in the case of wine that was stirred by a Gentile, it is prohibited even to derive benefit from the wine. Now, what does stir mean? Did he put his hand in it, or was he touching a stick and he stirred it with the stick? Well, earlier we talked about the palm branch, right? So it sounds like even if he stirred it with a stick and his hand never actually touched the wine, that's still going to be enough to prohibit even for benefit. Rav explains, Abaye cited Amoraic traditions, right? Amoraic means Amoraim. Now, Mora is a sage of the Gemara period after the year 200 of the Common Era. Atana is a sage of the Mishnaic period before the year 200 of the Common Era. Abaye cited Amoraic traditions as there was a certain incident in Nehardea in which a Gentile stirred the wine, and Shmuel deemed the wine prohibited. And there was a similar incident in Tiberia, and Rabbi Yochanan deemed the wine prohibited. So Rava recounts his reply. And I said to Abaye, Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan deemed the wine prohibited only because the people in those towns were not people well versed in Torah, and it was necessary to distance them from transgression. And Abaye said to me, are you saying that the people of Tiberia and Nehardea are not people well versed in Torah, whereas the people of Mechoza are well versed in Torah? This is obviously not the case, and therefore you should not have permitted the sale of the wine in Mechoza, even according to your reasoning. And Abaye cited a baraisa that teaches as follows. In the case of a Gentile market inspector who was in charge of measures and prices in the marketplace, who drilled a hole in a barrel with a tube and drew wine from the barrel through the tube in order to taste it, or who tasted the wine from the cup that was poured for him and then returned the residue to the barrel, then what is the law? And this was an incident that occurred, and the sages prohibited the wine. So Abaye said, what does this mean? Is the baraisa not prohibiting one from deriving benefit from the wine? And Rava replied, no, it is prohibiting one only from drinking it, right? Distinguishing prohibited for drinking, distinguishing that from prohibited even for benefit. So Abaye said, if so, let the Baraisa teach that the wine may be sold, as the latter clause of the Baraisa teaches in the case of a Gentile confiscator who extended his hand into a barrel of wine, thinking it was a barrel of oil, and it was found to be a barrel of wine. What is the law? And this was an incident that occurred. And the sages said, it may be sold, as the Gentile had no intention of touching wine. And the Gemara concludes, the refutation of the opinion of Rava is indeed a conclusive refutation. So where does the law end up? If a Gentile entered a Jew's store and, while searching for wine, inserted his hand into the wine and stirred it, it is prohibited to derive benefit from that wine, even to sell it. You can't do it. If that wine was then mixed into other wine, it is prohibited to derive benefit from the wine stirred by the Gentile, but the rest of the wine is permitted, and everyone agrees to this, as Rava retracted his original ruling. And there you go. That's what we have. Okay. A few questions. Joseph, is it just that a Gentile touched the wine and defiled it, or a confirmed idolater touched it that renders it unclean? Okay, we're mixing concepts here. We're not talking about defiling, and we're not talking about unclean. Unclean would normally, really unclean refers to tamei, right? And we don't like the word unclean because it sort of suggests that there's a hygiene thing here. So we say ritually pure or impure. That Gentiles do not become tamei or tahor. That is a concept that only applies to Jews and to food owned by Jews. Nevertheless, the sages said that the idolaters impart tumah if they touch you or your stuff simply by rabbinic decree. Even though they themselves aren't tamei, they impart tumah to keep us at a distance from them. What we've been talking about here is not, the Gentile could render wine tamei or produce tamei. Like that would make more sense, just that he touches the wheat and the wheat becomes tamei. But when we're talking about wine, the issue there is not whether he renders it tamei or tahor. Right. In other issues, we might talk about whether tumah or tahara applies. But when we're talking about idolaters and wine, it's because we are concerned that all Gentiles, and even though this is not true in the modern world, but in the ancient world, basically all Gentiles were idolaters. The most common form of idolatry was pouring wine as a libation. And so the sages decreed that if a Gentile touches your wine, the wine becomes prohibited. Not because it's tamei, but because it becomes prohibited as a libation of idolatry, right? So you got to keep the concepts distinct. Now you're asking, does it matter if he is actually a confirmed idolater or not? In the ancient world, there was no such distinction, right? The fact is, if they were not Jewish, they were idolaters. Even the question might be, did he use that wine? Did he have any intent with regard to that wine to use it for idolatry or not? We assume he's an idolater. And then it seems like, generally speaking, they didn't want to even go there because, we want to, the laws about idolatry are so stringent that we just assume that it becomes a libation if the Gentile touches it, unless we're sure that there was no idolatrous intent, and even then, only in certain particular situations, especially where we have wine that touched other wine, etc. Sharon, I'm reminded of a joke I heard as a kid. What do you call kosher wine mixed with non-kosher wine? Manishayets. Very good, I never heard that. Shoshan, amazing listening to this. Kol hakavod, I produce kosher Chilean wine. We should do a special edition for the accidental Talmudist. He was the rabbi at Esha Torah in Chile for 17 years. So I met him. I think we were together at a Pesach program in Niagara Falls. The Eish rabbi from Chile. I think we met, right? I'm pretty sure. And at any rate, I'm Chilean, right? I was born there. I left when I was 5. I'm a big fan of kosher Chilean wine. So reach out to us through the contact form. Joseph, I helped prune grapes for kosher wine as a Gentile in Israel, and we were overseen by the rabbinic authorities. How was that so, according to this? Pruning grapes, you were not dealing with wine, right? You were not dealing with wine. You were dealing with grapes. Now, what's interesting is if we're talking about, in modern times, like the rules have been updated and adjusted somewhat, right? Because there's no question that people who are vintners of kosher wine, it's not that all their employees are Jews. That is not so. But the entire production of that wine from beginning to end is supervised by a Jew. So therefore, we know that even if idolaters were mixed up in it, nothing was ever used for idolatry. And maybe things they eased the restrictions a little bit in modern times. But there might also still be that same distinction of what you were dealing with. Was it wine or not, right? It was not wine yet. Even today, however, right, you have the difference between mevushal and non-mevushal wine. So mevushal means it's flash pasteurized, and therefore, even though it's in the bottle where wine continues to age and its taste changes over time, if it's mevushal, right, that means that it was, like I said, flash pasteurized. The wine no longer changes. Therefore, that wine is finished. It's no longer in process, as it were, and a non-Jewish waiter could pour that wine for you. Whereas if it's non-mevushal, right, the wine was not flash pasteurized, in a sense, it's still in the process of becoming wine as it ages in the bottle. Now, for a frum person who drinks only kosher wine, that wine has to be poured by a Jew and a Shomer Shabbos Jew. There's a lot of stringencies in this that people still adhere to. Like I said, there's a lot of nuances in this, and there's a lot of aspects of kashrut and these kinds of laws that exist in the modern world that didn't exist in the ancient world because the means of distribution and production are different now. So as many laws as could be preserved and brought into the modern world, I'm sure we still do, but there have been other nuances that have been introduced or shifted over time, and we don't do that ourselves. We just do what our sages tell us to do, what our poskening rabbis tell us is the halacha. The halacha has been set for hundreds of years, unless new questions come up, and then we need answers for those. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Tuesday, at the regular Tuesday time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night.